This is really, really important. This is our tool for distributing information to the workforce and also enabling the workforce, all those professionals out there doing a great thing for U.S. Transportation Command, to ask questions and to talk to us about what are your concerns and what aren't we getting you as far as information. So I think this is absolutely critical that we continue to do this, the Transcom show, the tech talks that we will continue to have about new technology that's being used or that's out there, great ideas, great processes, because we can only get better if we're all communicating properly up and down the chain, and we're getting information and also receiving information from the professionals in the workforce that are on the receiving end of ideas, right? So, but we're very interested in your ideas. So we're looking forward to getting started. Today we have a great opportunity, a fantastic opportunity. When I first got here a little over a year and a half ago, I sat in one of my very first events to go to was a cyber roundtable. And the cyber roundtable, it was a great opportunity to watch a process go from a very small event to now what is now a very large event involving several different folks, a lot of stakeholders. So the team up front here on the podium is going to help us kind of describe that, explain some things about the cyber roundtables, why it's interesting to us, why it's important to us, and then we'll take questions towards the very end. So I appreciate you being here. So teammates, if you don't mind, we got a lot of new faces in the audience and out on DCS that may or may not know you because either they're new here or I think you're probably the newest there, Colonel. Although you've been here a year now. Yeah.
Sure.
So, but if you could just introduce yourself, tell us where you're working, and kind of a little bit of your experience, and then we'll get on with it.
Great. Good morning, sir. Good morning, everyone. Jerry Cronin. I'm in J6. I am Transcom's Chief Information Security Officer, and as of this last May, I became the lead of the cyber roundtables. So.
Awesome. Thanks.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Beth Graboitz from the J36 Cyber Division, formerly known as the Joint Cyber Center. But I'm the link with J3 and J6 and everything we're doing on the cyber realm.
Good morning, Lance Carpenter. I work in the strategy shop in the J5. I'm probably the only one who does not have cyber in my title anywhere.
Yeah.
But that means I represent the rest of us. So in the cyber roundtable, we had some discussion about the war game and the cyber effects that we practiced in there. So that was how I got involved in it.
Okay. Awesome. Well, can't thank you enough for taking the time to be here. Appreciate it. Jerry, I'm going to start with you to talk a little bit about the purpose of the roundtable. So what's the purpose of the cyber roundtable meetings, and how did they come about? Kind of give us the history of it.
So as I mentioned, I just became involved just a few months ago. So I have the history handed down verbally to me as done in a tribal format. So my understanding of the history goes something like this. That, Transcom always realized that our commercial carriers provide 80 to 90% of our transportation capacity. But under General McDow's leadership, we really started thinking, okay, what does that mean to us? And what does it mean that we're so heavily reliant on cyberspace? And we've created a lot of military rigor and discipline on the DoD network. But that rigor and discipline stops at our network. It does not extend out to our commercial partners who use the internet and who use their own corporate systems to manage the information they use to move our people and goods. And so there were some discussions back late 2015, 2016 of whether or not we really understood what the challenges that face us on the commercial carrier side. And so it came up during a dinner, as I understand, the classic idea on the back of a napkin that, we've got two-way conversation within the military. Maybe we need two-way conversation with our transportation service providers, our carriers. So D.R. Kennerly, one of our division chiefs in J6, pitched the idea to General McDow, and thus the first roundtable was born.
Awesome. And
so we've had 5 of them now. They started small. In fact, one of them was actually in the honor conference room, so that's a pretty small crowd. A few months ago when we were discussing the roundtables with General McDow, he said, this is growing both in rank. This is going up to the national level. We invited some congressmen and some congressional staffers to the last one. We're also increasing the number of people that are coming. So General McDow said a few months ago that if we do this right, in a roundtable or two, we'll be doing this down at the Dome Stadium down in St. Louis. It's going to be that popular.
Right.
So.
Well, and also creating some great effects, right? So if any of you have had an opportunity to read General McDoux's testimony, whether it's his House testimony or his Senate testimony, and then if you reviewed the Senate Armed Services Committee questioning General Lyons as he was receiving his inquiries, so much of the discussion was about cyber. The majority of the discussion was about cyber. So absolutely critical, especially in the times we're in today. So I appreciate you giving us that perspective. So Colonel, what's been your main takeaway from the Cyber Roundtable meetings?
Sir, I think for me, the greatest takeaway is just having that forum where you can bring together experts from across commercial industry, academia, and then Department of Defense, interagency, to have those discussions about these hard cyber questions that we're dealing with. I'm a cyber professional, so I'm used to understanding the threat and dealing with the cyber thing and IT professionals, but we have to elevate that discussion outside of that core group to the rest of the folks. This forum has provided us that opportunity to get to the C-suite in commercial industry, to get to senior level officials, even here in Transcom and throughout academia, throughout the Department of Defense, because we do have to find ways to address those issues. How do we share threat information? How do we work together in this contested environment that's our new normal today? Mm-hmm. So really just that opportunity to understand those various perspectives and have different ideas on how to deal with those challenges. That's been the greatest takeaway.
Well, I mean, lots of great things coming out of it. And so just for the audience realization that we're just not talking at these things, right? Action is actually coming out of these things, and it's pretty impressive to see. So, and I think you talked a little bit about the partners that are coming in, whether it's academia or our industry partners. So, Mr. Cronin, if you could tell us, why does Transcom feel that it's important to include academia and industry in these particular meetings?
Well, so how we operate in cyberspace and how we secure it and how we enable our mission to be resilient is a very complex and challenging problem, and we need more than the military perspective on it. So we want to bring in all the experts to understand what the threats are, what the challenges are, what the potential solutions are. So from an industry standpoint, I kind of break that out into two categories. There's the industry that's our transportation service providers, our carriers. They're there from an operational perspective. They're the ones we want to be secure and to be resilient. Then there's the technical industry, the people that are implementing solutions out there today who are dealing with customers with similar challenges. So those both bring two different perspectives, even though we sometimes lump them together as industry. And then academia, well, they're working with the art of the possible. A lot of the research, a lot of our Defense Science Board reports, a lot of the R&D efforts that are coming out, new ways to mitigate threats, identify threats, are coming out of academia. And then of course we bring the military perspective. So I see this problem as kind of like the elephant. We're a bunch of blind men, touching it. Well, if we talk together, the person who's touching the tail, the person who's touching the trunk or the body, we can piece together what that total picture is and understand the total challenge and come up with solutions and a way ahead that really gets after what we need.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a learning experience on both sides, right? Because I can, in talking to some of the stakeholders that have come in, industry and academia that have helped us out, it's kind of an aha moment on all sides.
Right.
To, hey, we didn't think of that, or hey, perhaps we can try this particular thing, which is making some serious headway. So
right, and if I may, one good example is, I've been working with cyber for a long time, and normally when you write a contract, you just determine what we, the government, needs, and you put in the contract, and the contractors want to bid on that, fine. If they don't bid. But it's different with our transportation service providers because they're operating in the global commercial transportation environment. Now, sometimes we charter entire planes or entire ships, but a lot of times not. A lot of times we just have shipments on planes and ships. So if we put military level rigor in some of those requirements, now those carriers have to change in many cases, their business process, they might not remain competitive in that global transportation environment. So that's where we need to hear from them of what are those unique challenges, what are those things that we might want to ask you to do that would cause you to be non-competitive, where you really have to make a decision. Am I gonna stick with Transcom and the DoD and doing these shipments, or am I gonna go off and where it's less expensive to work?
Right, and especially the larger companies may be able to absorb that cost in some ways, but the mom and pop companies, the small business owners and things that might not have that capability to do that, we have to be sensitive to that as well as we go through making certain requirements on them.
Right.
But I think it's also making them realize just how vulnerable and important it is for them to secure their networks, and of course they're spending a lot of money on it. So.
Yes, definitely.
So Mr. Carpenter, General McDew has asked us to raise our discussion on cyber to the national level. So what's your cyber roundtable team doing to execute his vision?
Well, sir, for a while there, I thought I'd get through this morning without having to answer any questions.
Not so fast.
But not so. Well, the Cyber Roundtable is just one event that we're using to try and elevate that conversation. And, like Jerry has talked about, we need to elevate it outside of just the Department of Defense. So that's why he's saying elevate it to the national level. But we're doing a lot of things, incorporating it into our war games, exercises, and anytime we do assessments of programmatics and things like that, we're inserting cyber discussion into it. But the Cyber Roundtable, because it so far has been kind of discrete and targeted at cyber professionals, is one way that we can start to dive a little deeper into the discussion about cyber. And I think that's what's needed, because right now we kind of look at cyber as this big, blob out there. And I'm speaking for the rest of us.
That's the technical term.
But we see this big blob of cyber out there and wonder, okay, so what's my role in that? What's my piece of it? The Cyber Roundtable, we actually get to dive into some very specific areas and specific discussion points to see that it's really made up of a lot of complex pieces and parts. And we all kind of own different aspects of that. So the Cyber Roundtable, I think, will elevate it by helping us to be more informed in the way we talk about cyber. Because I think, this is just me speaking, but I think we kind of need to get away from looking at it as a bumper sticker. It's not just something you lay out there and stick on things that you want to talk about and say, oh yeah, cyber. The National Defense Strategy talks about competition and trying to get us away from this thinking about a binary world of war and peace and things like that. Well, cyber as a domain, and that's where that was my aha moment, is really thinking about it as a domain. Cyber as a domain is an area that we have to ask ourselves some questions like, how is warfare conducted in the cyber domain? And what really constitutes warfare? At what point is an act by an adversary considered an act of war? We don't know the answer to that. And so we have to dive a little deeper into it and understand a little bit better with a greater fidelity to start making some of those kind of determinations. So we got to get smarter about it and get beyond just the bumper sticker and maybe demystify it a little bit for folks.
And I think after every roundtable we've had, we think of other people that should have been there, right? We go, oh gosh, had we just invited this person, we might have had that piece of information that we needed. So that's why I believe it's grown, and it's right to do that. So, but it takes a whole heck of a lot of work. So Colonel, why are these roundtables important to Transcom? You talked a little bit about it, but in your particular function, why is that important?
Well, I think I touched on it earlier in the previous question, that it really elevates the discussion out of my normal cyber realm. I'm used to talking about cyber, and I think it's important. Mm-hmm. I just want to be able to get that out to everybody else. And just in the couple of roundtables I've been in since I've been here, I've seen it kind of be able to go out to the rest of the audience and to help them understand why that cyber discussion is important to them, and to help maybe understand some of the threats that are out there, and to get that just awareness in the everyday thinking of how we do our normal business.
Yeah, I think when I say the word cyber hygiene to Doc Friedrichs, to now Brigadier General Friedrichs, he's like, this is not a medical term. But the point is, are we training folks at all levels of the organization? The vulnerabilities that we are all subject to, right, by not understanding cyber. So we need to train folks at every level. It's just like an example would be when we went to the USB ports, right? People were sticking in things to the USB ports. It took a little while to train the human who are well-intentioned folks, and they just wanted to charge their cell phone. You know, that's all they wanted to do. But it took a while to do that. It's going to take a while to do that as well within the entire workforce, to just show how vulnerable we are if we're not paying attention to the phishing exercises that we have, or the real phishing that's going on out there. So thinking about how that's going to impact us, not only in the Department of Defense, but outside in industry as well. My 12-year-old came home during school last year and was working on a project of how to create a secure password. I was very happy that the schools are doing it at that level and younger, because these youngsters, like many of you have at your homes, that are teaching you how to work your iPhone 6 or my iPhone 4, you know, they're the ones helping you figure this out. It's important that we start them at a young age so that when they get to be senior leaders in organizations, it's just in their DNA. So,
Well, sir, if I may, you know, one of the challenges we have is that when we think about cyber, we tend to think defensively, and that's it. One of the other aha moments I had from the Cyber Roundtable was when Dr. Roper was talking about big data. And one of the concerns I have when we talk about strategy is I say, you know, one of the issues we have is not just cyber being corrupted, you know, or compromised, but what's the effect on us if our confidence in our data or our cyber capabilities is eroded? You know, that's sort of a contested environment thing too, and it's not even one that you have to do anything necessarily, you know, kinetic or anything else, but if our confidence is eroded in our capabilities, that deters us. So how do we now turn that around and flip it on its head and think about that? And when he talked about big data, one of the things he said was, you know, if you have enough data, the outliers of the bad data become less problematic, because you've got masses of it to look at. So you have a bigger universe, a bigger population to analyze. And I thought about that, and I said, that's one way we can get after gaining confidence in our data and IT systems is by using big data intelligently. So that was just an area where I was thinking about it, you know, not being just defensive, and think about how we can protect ourselves and harden ourselves, but how can we then be resilient? How can we respond? How can we be proactive about it? So that was a takeaway for me.
yeah, thanks. Okay, Mr. Cronin, have you thought about recording the speakers? Because we talked a little bit about, a lot of folks don't know, hey, who are these speakers, the guests that came in? Who are you bringing in from industry and from academia, and what are their credentials? Have you thought about recording those and offering those up to the crowd?
We have considered it, but we really want the environment to be non-attribution. Sometimes, you know, we want our carriers especially to be able to talk about some of their threats and challenges without fear of anyone taking notes.
Yeah, they have a business to run.
That's right, they do. So while it would be nice to, no, we want to keep the discussion free and open.
Are we non-attribution here?
Yeah. Ask the
asked
folks
right
on
up
DA.
front.
Somebody taking notes.
All right. If someone was interested in attending the roundtables, which I'm hoping we're going to spark a little bit more interest as we go through this, how would they go about getting invited to the roundtable?
So I have to start saying the official title of these roundtables is Senior Leader Cyber Roundtable. And as you know, based on the venue we've had in the past, we've had limitations on the number of people. We are trying to expand that. In fact, the last roundtable that we had at the conference center here on base, we actually had some overflow rooms where we had a live video feed. People could come see it. So the short answer is, if there's a senior leader that believes he or she should go, just contact us and let us know, and we'll work it. If somebody who's not a senior leader, let us know, and depending on the venue, we'll try to have people either sit in the back or sit in an overflow room, or they can even volunteer to help with microphones or the doors, the registration, and kind of, you know, be a part of it that way too.
Right. So if somebody had a great idea that they thought that we ought to perhaps discuss or bring up but wasn't going to attend, do they just shoot that information to you? Do you guys put out an all-call prior to the cyber roundtables to say, hey, we have an up and coming one, subject matters. If you've got a particular subject you're interested in talking about or elevating, is there a way to do that?
Well, sir, I don't believe that was one of the written questions in
It wasn't.
advance. No, it's not there. But I do have an answer, and that is we're actually going to go out with a formal task in TMT. I know people love to get tasks in TMT to form a Transcom-wide team and also include our components, AMC, SDDC, and MSC in the planning stage. And we actually have our first meeting this Friday for the next roundtable to help drive the agenda and theme. So certainly anybody can send us an email and say, hey, I've got an idea, or be on the lookout for that TMT that should come out very soon. So for the very reason you asked that question, we want to cast a wide net, get as many different thoughts and perspectives on how we should shape this next roundtable.
Right, and just for those in the audience, that we do invite, and those participants are, not only Transcom itself, but the component commanders and others, our DLA partners and others that participate, and they're always welcome to attend and encouraged to attend. So Colonel Graboitz, what have the focus areas been in the past cyber roundtables, and what topics will be included in the future, the one coming up in the not-too-distant future?
Well, sir, I think Jerry touched on a little bit with the history of the roundtables. Initially, we were looking at cybersecurity and the posture for our commercial industry partners, and how we help secure, defend them, and ideas, solutions with academia, industry, and interagency DoD. That was kind of our focus to start off with. Well, we've since evolved, and we took outputs from the earlier roundtables to help form themes for the following ones. And we actually have at this point kind of a 5-year theme of how we want to go through each year and the types of topics we want to discuss. So at the last one, we kind of focused on that operationalizing the fourth component, and touched a little bit on how we might defend them, and then we covered information sharing, how we get out threat information to them, and just discuss their challenges and just potential solutions. So in the future, we want to build on that. And really, for instance, we're looking at a new the national cyber strategy that's about to be published. So we'll want to incorporate some of those themes, pillars, objectives that are in there, and have that dialogue, in following roundtables. And as Jerry said too, this Friday we're going to start discussing the next cyber roundtable and where we want to go with that.
Okay. Well. I think it's proven just getting industry and academia together, whether it's through the cyber roundtables, through our craft and visa meetings that we have with our industry partners, has paid huge dividends because one of the last few exercises I've had the pleasure of participating in, I've heard our industry partners say, we need more information, and if you can involve us up front in a lot of your exercises, for example, then we're even more aware of how vulnerable we are to your mission, if we don't protect our environment. So I think those have paid huge dividends. And I heard Joe McHugh say just the other day to the SG, you need to be thinking potentially about having those type of medical roundtables that will keep our medical UCP on the radar, at the forefront, to make sure that we're getting the attention it needs. And because of the work efforts and the incredible things that have been done by the cyber team and the entire team, it has really shaped the way the boss has gotten Congress's ear, right, and others to listen. Mr. Gibson was just here, the CMO was just here this past Friday, and he got an earful of it, but he was very supportive, and he shook his head in this direction quite a bit, along with his staff, on how can I help, and how can I help to put the good news out there to the service secretaries and others to ensure that we keep this momentum going. So I can't thank you guys enough for that. So now I'm going to open it up to the audience to see if you've got any questions at all for the team up here. They can be about anything, but particularly about the cyber roundtables or anything you want to know. Over here.
Yes, sir. Realizing Lance is up there, this is Lou Bernstein. I know someone else has to ask a question, so I'll fill that role. So how is the cyber roundtable shaping, driving, or influencing innovation. So, do we have Cybercom and others as members of that team? Are we working with the DoD, the DepSec, DepScience, cyber science and technology community? Are we, do we have a handle on what stuff is being done? Are we looking at how Transcom spend their dollars, and are we influencing the R&D dollars that we're doing in cyber to make sure that those are reaching your goals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
I can take that. Lou's representing the rest of us too, and I think he's on the right track in thinking about how does cyber influence my world of work, and vice versa. How does my world of work influence cyber? And I think that's how we need to be thinking about this stuff. But again, we need to be able to communicate back and forth with the folks that are organizing and running the roundtables and so on and so forth to help inform and influence that agenda and the shaping of those things. So that's a great example, Lou, of how we need to be thinking about cyber in our own workspace, in our own world, and what's the impact there.
Mm-hmm.
So.
How about if because we take too long, how about if I just send a lengthy email to all those things you need? You three guys, you can consider how that stuff should be incorporated into future cyber roundtables.
I think you should send that to Jerry.
Well, I'm going to do an for the two of them up there, and you have a good time. Is that okay?
Sure.
Sounds great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. What else? Yes, sir.
Good morning. Mike Krupe from J4L. I'm just kind of curious if you could just talk about what's the right organization now. I was part of the team that first put together the Joint Cyber Center back in 2010, and I understand you've dismantled it, for lack of a better term, but how should we be organized to defend ourselves?
Yeah, Colonel, can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
the reorg and how that's kind of going?
Absolutely. So I don't like to use the word dismantled and dissolved, start off with. I kind of like to talk about it that we evolved, that we're normalizing cyber so that we look at it just the same as any other domain, air, land, and sea, and that we're integrating it into the rest of the command so that everybody gets a little bit of cyber. I know when I first got here a year ago, there was just a lot of, anytime a cyber question or cyber issue came up, it'd be, those cyber people over there, go ask those cyber people. Well, I look at it, we're all cyber people. Cyber impacts all of us. And, one of the things the roundtables helps us do is understand how. How does it impact us? But as far as the integration and what we've done with the JCC evolution, what we've done is taken a hard look at the functions that the Joint Cyber Center performed and the folks who were doing those, the experts, and looked at, in a normal staff environment, where would those functions be performed? So, on the J54 side, they do strategy, strategic, deliberate planning type stuff. So I had folks in the JCC that were doing strategic, deliberate, future ops planning, and tactical planning. So I looked at those folks who were doing, the strategic type planning, deliberate planning, and we moved them over to J54. Another really great example is the cyber protection team operations that we were doing, very tactical level, how we do defending our network. Well, over in J6, they have a really large part of what we do to defend our networks. So one of the things I looked at is, would there be more synergy, and would it be a better place to incorporate that defensive type activity into J6? And the answer was yes. So we moved that function over to J6. So, just in short, it was all about how do we integrate cyber into the right places in our organization, where is there the most synergy, and how do we get everybody else thinking about cyber? Because part of the end state is really changing the culture. I don't want people to think when they think about cyber that those cyber people over there, go ask those cyber people that, oh, this is my organization. I'm going to go to J54 to ask about the national cyber strategy.
Yeah, and that's actually prevented us from creating a small echo chamber where only
Right.
cyber gets discussed in one area and not
Exactly.
anywhere else. And using the folks that have some cyber expertise in the planning and the strategy development piece, I think we'll get that out filtered much faster. And in a way that's not tied to cyber lingo or cyber lexicon or anything like that. We can also translate it so that us, regular folks can understand it. And I think that's critical. So thanks for that.
So some folks may have heard about the arrival of some new teammates from 24th Air Force.
Great.
Can you talk a little bit about how they'll be integrated into the team?
Yes, sir. So we have a cyberspace operations integrated planning element. We have a team of one here so far, Lieutenant Colonel Warakomsky, if you've seen him around the hall. There he is right there. So he just recently arrived. But that team, that element, is a forward operating planning element of both JFHQ Doden, so that's that defensive subordinate headquarters of Cybercom, and it's also a forward plan element of the JFHQC Air Force, so that's the offensive arm of Cybercom. So they're here to help us with those planning efforts, particularly at the operational and tactical level. So that team, when it's complete, will have 39 folks, ADCON to Air Force, so they're all Air Force type folks, mix of military and civilian. But Shay's going to be building that team over the next couple of months, and actually his first member is going to be here in August, with the second one in December. So the team's going to be building up. And for all of you, we'll be coming out to all of you, because step number one that we're going to look at is how does that team incorporate with the rest of the Transcom team, and how do they integrate with them, and what types of functions do we really want that team to perform?
Mm-hmm.
So more to come on all of that.
Great. We look forward to that, and welcome aboard. I look forward to having you and the team here. One question out in DCS land. It says, where do you see the biggest threat to our daily operations from a cyber perspective? Seems like military and civilians alike don't realize the severe dangers that exist sometimes.
All right. So let me give more of a high level, kind of a strategic answer to that.
At the unclassified high level.
Well, right, exactly, and that's part of it. Is that at the unclassified level, I'd like to say, I think the biggest threat is that organizations don't know how to quantify and assess risk with the same management framework they use to manage other risks. So it goes a little bit what Lance said a minute ago about you got the lexicon and the jargon. And I see that across all organizations, in dealing with our carriers. So that's the single most thing. Cyber. We know how many vulnerabilities we have on a system, but what does that mean? How does that impact operation? Because if you don't really understand it, if you can't prioritize it, because you have to prioritize it, because you're never going to be vulnerability free. You're never going to be totally impenetrable. But you have to know what things can do the most damage and get after those first. And I don't really know that there's a good. I don't know that organizations are implementing good management frameworks for cyber.
Okay. All right. Other questions? We're paying them a lot of money to be up here. So yes, ma'am, in the back.
Hi, sir. Stephanie Pash from the Command Support Group. I was just wondering, what are some of the key action items that came out of the recent Cyber Roundtable?
All right. Flip a coin. All right, I'll go first.
Okay.
As these roundtables have evolved, really, the early ones were to get a common understanding of what the situation was. So, my estimate, there weren't real action items out of that, and there's actually no formal action items taken. But what it does is it drives our discussion, and it helps us focus on some of the things that we need to get after. So, for example, we've had our carriers tell us that, okay, we might be taking a ship into a port, and the military might know what the vulnerabilities are, what the threats are in cyber, and they don't tell us. So we might be going into the fray when either bad things are going on, Or actually, the military might be doing offensive cyber operations in there. We don't know. We're going to hostile territory. Now, on the kinetic side, if we see surface-to-air missiles are either being launched or readied, we notify our carriers about that. Be careful of these areas. Activities been going on. Bad things are happening here, here, and here. But we don't do that in the cyber world. So having those discussions then tells us and Transcom, hey, we need to find a way to start sharing that cybersecurity information. Obviously, we're limited to the classification levels our carriers have right now, but let's start sharing the unclassified information. In fact, that was a big discussion at the last roundtable, and the consensus was we should develop threat information that's unclassified that we can quickly send to our carriers. Because in the military, a lot of times what we do is we have intelligence information, we write the whole picture, which is classified, and then if we want to send it out unclassified, we have to say, okay, what do we need to trim down? So out of the last roundtable, they said, no, you write it unclassified, so it's ready to send right away. So that was a specific action item. Some action items that maybe aren't so specific are just the whole national level issue. We have gaps in our authorities at the national and the DoD level, and overlap in some cases. And so we're able to identify those issues, and General McDough, through his testimony, can influence Congress. And in fact, from my perspective, once Congress realized that General McDough was very informed on cyber issues, and in part through the roundtables, I think Congress lays in wait for him every year, because this is the four-star commander that we can ask those hard cyber questions. In fact, so one of the questions they asked him recently was, how do you know your carriers are available and viable in your time of need if we need to mobilize, if we go to war? There aren't laws or policies set up for us to have visibility into our contractors' networks. So that's a tough question to answer. But it's through our collaboration that we kind of figure out what are the limits, legal, policy, authorities. What are those limits? How much will they share with us? How much do we need to be able to know their military readiness, if you will?
And just to add on to Jerry's comments too, I think one of the larger discussions that's starting to come out of the roundtables is just how do we go about defending our fourth component? We know that it's important to us, and as Jerry touched on, we today don't have inherent authorities to go and just hop on to a commercial network and defend it for them. And whose responsibility is that in the nation? Is it DHS? Is it FBI? Is it Cybercom? And what responsibility do we have? Because they're really important to our operations. So we're having that discussion, and not just at the roundtable, but at that national level with Cybercom, with interagency, but during the roundtable too, to understand again those perspectives from the commercial industry. How much government help do they really want, and how does that impact their operations when they disclose that they've had some type of a cyber event and need help with that.
Right.
So.
Right.
Sir, I could add on, if I may. While I didn't get any action items directly from the roundtable, I certainly got some from General McDough as a result of the roundtable. And one of those is to factor in cyber equities in every war game, exercise, event that we do, tabletop, something like that. And what that does is it kind of gets us thinking about what kind of second and third order effects might be out there. And he has several other questions that he tasks us to ask every time we think about solving a problem or addressing an issue or coming up with an initiative. And things like, are we addressing all of our JSCAP missions? Are we taking into account attrition and those elements when we do these plans? Have we factored in cyber? Have we thought about what the implications might be on the fourth component for anything we do? So he has those questions that he asks of us every time we do anything, just to make sure we're thinking about those second and third order effects. So what that does is it gets us thinking about that on a regular basis. And so now cyber is going to be one of those things that we think about on a regular basis because we have to ask that question.
You bet. as we evolve this process.
Right. Sir, is it proper protocol for a panel member to ask a question of another panel?
Absolutely, go
Great.
for it.
Great. Hey, Lance, so I understood you, understood you gave a briefing at the last roundtable. Could you kind of touch upon that, summarize with the U-boats and the shipping lanes?
Yeah. We were asked to kind of give a summary of what our last war game covered. And the war game specifically was targeting cyber issues and the fourth component, our transportation service providers. So part of that war game was a senior leader seminar where we had senior leaders from different transportation providers in the room with senior leaders from Transcom and the components. And one of the things we talked about was the fact that the contested environment that we talk about, and others are talking about this like it's a new thing, but we have evolved to the point where we say we live in a contested environment every day, all the time, 24/7. So it's not new, it just is. So we said, this is not new, and in fact, we gave a historical reference back in World War II with the U-boat threat and how we had to contend with that contested environment of the U-boats in the Atlantic theater. So we said that we have been here before and we managed to work our way through it, so we're there again. We're there again, we need to manage to work our way through it again, and that's why we were all meeting. We also talked about some issues that were revealed during the war game, one of them being, how do we know that our transportation providers are going to be there and ready to support us in the time of a contingency? We flat out asked them that question, in light of the fact that there will be some cyber contested environments and some areas that may in fact involve kinetics. And we were reassured that they would be, which is certainly easy to say, but it's nice to hear it. But we talked about that. We talked about what are some of the implications of cyber threat during the war game. We revealed some of those kind of things, talking about, again, the fact that our confidence level may be eroded. So it's kind of a degradation, not necessarily just an on-off thing. And I think that the biggest takeaway for the transportation service providers during the war game was this is a bigger issue than we thought, and it becomes even bigger in a contingency environment, and we need to be prepared for that. So one of General McDow's desires out of the war game was to elevate the fourth component members to a war footing. Start thinking about what do we do in the event that we have to go to war, and what does that mean for us? And so that's how we directed that conversation to get to. So we carried that into the Cyber Roundtable to get them to think about that in terms and context of the cyber realm.
Right. Excellent. And specific to the U-boat threat, in the years leading up to World War II, German U-boats started targeting military and commercial ships.
Right.
Transportation ships. And Lance had the slide charts year by year where it shows, in the beginning it's kind of few ships here and there are some kind of scattered across the Atlantic. And my understanding is we kind of figured, well, the Atlantic's a big place. There's security in the fact that it's hard to find these ships. And as the years go on, as you progress through 1936, 1937, you find out that U-boats didn't have much problem finding those ships. And more of them are sunk every year closer to our shores as the years go on. And so then we decided that, well, wait a second, maybe we need to give some military protection to these ships. Maybe we need to establish shipping lanes where we can then protect these commercial ships and military in those shipping lanes. And the number of ships sunk dropped dramatically, and we really kind of turned the tide. So, as Lance said, we've dealt with this contested environment before, but in the kinetic world, in the physical world. So the key to the point of Lance's briefing at the roundtable was to get the attendees thinking, what does that mean in the cyber world? It's not the same thing, right? They probably don't want people showing up at their IT departments in uniform saying, okay, I'm from the military. I'm gonna follow your server and protect you from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Not quite the same thing, because they've got data on those servers from other customers, multinational customers, in some cases other countries, and they don't necessarily want us in there. So what does that mean to provide them protection? And it's that kind of discussion that General McDow bases his comment on, that we're really dealing with a national level issue here. This isn't a Transcom issue. These carriers, yes, they're performing the Transcom mission, and that's why we leading forward in this, and in many cases, DoD thought leaders in how to deal with this situation of commercial carriers performing a military mission. But they're critical to Transcom, but they're also part of our nation's critical infrastructure. So adversaries could target them because of the mission they're doing for us. They could be targeting our carriers because they're part of our nation's critical infrastructure. They could be targeting them because they're big money, ransomware or whatnot. Or it could just be collateral damage, as I know we saw last year. One of our carriers suffered hundreds of $millions of loss, and they weren't even the intended target.
Yeah, the underlying narrative there, Jerry, is that when we get into a conflict or even competition, the adversary is smart enough to realize that you go after the logistics.
Right.
And that's the piece that we saw in history, and it's the piece we're seeing now, and that's probably one reason why General McDough gets a lot of pointed questions at testimony, because people are starting to realize that logistics is not just a follow-on function, it's a lead function. Some would argue that the tooth-to-tail model is obsolete because logistics is now a leading indicator for where we're going as a nation and our national security efforts. So I think that was kind of an underlying theme there, is that the logistics piece is one that the adversary is smart enough to go after. So we need to be smart enough to pay attention to it in a defensive mode as well.
Yeah, I would argue that most folks that got their assignment to U.S. Transportation Command within the last couple of years didn't think they were going to be coming to a command where that combatant commander was probably one of the most vocal about the cyber mission, about the cyber vulnerabilities, more so than so many other combatant commanders. So that's a big deal. I think one of the very concrete tasks that had come out was for our AQ professionals to look at how we write our contracts, right? And are we ensuring there's a minimum requirement in each contract that the industry partners have got to meet, and that's been pretty successful, I think. So we had another question here. We got a few more minutes.
Thanks to panel. There's been a lot of discussion regarding how the Cyber Roundtable has improved our relationship between us and the commercial transportation providers. Is there any evidence that this has helped improve the relationship amongst them? I assume there's a lot of overlap in the capabilities they provide. They might consider each other competitors. Maybe there be a bit of tension between the people that show. Have they, maybe out of a sense of nationalism, found this as an opportunity to cooperate and share good practices, or is it just like a audition?
That's a kabuki dance that is an interesting one to watch. Certainly when one of the providers was hacked, they told their story and everybody is feverishly taking notes. So at that level, there's a lot of great coordination, but unfortunately that's too late. And to your point, we need to be doing that earlier on, but you still have the proprietary issues and things like that at stake, and they are profit generators. So we haven't crossed that bridge yet to where it's totally open and free transmittal of information. But the Cyber Roundtable, at least it gets everybody in the same room, talking about the same thing. And so there's going to be some collaboration driven by that dynamic.
Right. And as I mentioned, we focused the last roundtable on one of the focus areas was information sharing. So we actually had one of the CEOs of one of our carriers turn to the CEO of another carrier and say, I guess we need to start sharing information. And so that was kind of a big moment. And obviously they want to strip out anything that's going to reveal vulnerabilities or give a competitive advantage to the person they're sharing information with. But if they put some thought and analysis to it, they can find ways to share information so all of their security postures increase without sharing something sensitive to their business area.
Yeah,
Very professional relationships. They all know one another. They come to these quite often, and so there is a sense of trust, but there is also a sense of caution for the proprietary type of
Sure, and that kind of ties into your question about contracting language and everything, because one of the things that we could easily do is overwhelm them with requirements to the point we get nobody bidding.
That's exactly right. As a matter of fact, I think in last year's testimony, the House Armed Services Committee asked General McDough, what do you want us to do? What do you want us to make them do? And he said, allow me to deal with it.
Right.
Because if we ask for too much help up front, we may be getting more help than we asked for. That's going to limit our industry partners and those that don't necessarily need our business to stay afloat. So. Okay. Well, listen, I can't thank you guys enough. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the questions from the audience. I appreciate the time you've taken and the time you take every day to get after this subject. So these cyber roundtables are not easy to put together. And as they've grown over time, you know, it takes a lot to get the invites out, if we're going to have it on the installation, to get people through the gate, to get the public affairs that goes around it, the strategic communications about the roundtable, the after actions that have to take place. So I want to take this opportunity to thank some folks. We had 8 military members on this last one, 13 civil servants, 2 contractor support individuals from the 6, the 5-4, the 3, protocol, staff judge advocate, the CAG, public affairs, legislative affairs, and security. And so I quickly ask those members that might be in the audience to go ahead and stand up, and I'll just run through your names real quick. But Lieutenant Colonel Lamore, Major Kuhl, Ms. Cross, Mr. White, Ms. Davenport, Mr. Kickglider, Captain Stevens, Major Quinlan, Ms. Garrow, Senior Master Sergeant Rifle, Rita Whitehead, Sergio Gonzalez, Major Tarnowski, Ms. Lamberth, Lieutenant Colonel Fogarty, Mr. LaFrance, Rob Bryson over in the 3, Steve Strait in the 3 in our mission assurance, and then of course Colonel